Hey everyone, my name is Leah Knoll. I am the program manager in the Center for Learning and Academic Success at Suffolk. And I'm really excited to be here today to present one of our Class Act sessions. For today's Class Act, I will be presenting some helpful information on how you as a student can prepare for any upcoming tests, quizzes, midterms, or final exams that you may have in your classes. And as we're wrapping up with midterms and transitioning into the second half of the semester, this hopefully will give you time to reflect on some of the current study strategies that you're already using, but also inspire you to try some new strategies if you feel like that's needed. Figuring out a study strategy and plan that works for you is really key to doing as well as you want to in many of your classes. So we're going to talk about how you can do that today. So throughout this presentation, we are going to talk about a few of the things that you see on this slide. I'm first going to talk about learning and the brain. I'm also going to talk about how you can prepare for exams and some things that you can be doing to help you do as well as you can. I'm also going to focus on things that you can be doing before, during, and after the test, and touch on some strategies for tackling different types of exam questions. For example, how you should attempt or try to answer multiple choice questions, short answer questions, essay questions, and other types of questions that you might see on your test. And lastly, but definitely a really important topic, is we're going to talk about how you can manage any test anxiety or worries that you may feel when it comes to succeeding or taking your tests. So as I mentioned, I am going to spend just a quick minute talking about learning and the brain. And I promise I'm only going to go surface level, as I'm definitely not a science person. And so I will talk about this short and sweet. But your brain is mostly composed of neurons. And a neuron, like the one that you see on my slide, is a cell that our brains send and receive information to one another. So when you're learning, when you're studying for a test or an exam, important chemical changes happen in your brain. And we start to be able to make new connections between our neurons. And you see a little diagram that's explaining or showing some of those connections that can be made. But what does this have to do with how we study and learn? It actually means quite a bit, and it does play a big role in how we take in and how we memorize or learn information. So basically, the more you practice something, the more you repeat a task or try something that you haven't tried before, the stronger these connections between our neurons become, and the faster these messages are sent. So we start to remember things quicker, we start to solve problems faster, and we become more comfortable with the different types of information that we are trying to learn. And that's exactly what happens as you're studying or as you're trying to learn new information for your exam. But the most important thing on this slide is that learning anything, learning any type of new skill or new concept or new information takes time. It takes dedication and it takes practice. So doing that over and over and over. Learning is not something that happens overnight. So be patient with yourself, try different strategies and techniques. And my hope is that you'll be able to find something that works for you. Something that I also think is equally as important is preparing in advance. So as I said, learning material and learning information doesn't happen overnight. It's a process that takes sometimes days, weeks, months, or even years, depending on what you're trying to learn. So you need to prepare in advance and give yourself time. Our first tip is to prioritize what needs to be done and to set some realistic or obtainable things that you can actually achieve for what you want to accomplish. You want to make sure you're setting goals. And before any exam, you want to make sure that you have all the information you need so that you know how to prepare and what to do. So some questions that you can ask yourself: what type of exam is this? So is this a midterm? Is this a final that's worth a large percentage of my grade? Is it a quiz to just quickly assess my learning or your learning, but doesn't really, take a big hit on your grade? How much of your grade is this worth? So as I just mentioned, we will spend a lot more time and energy preparing for something that's worth a lot of our grade, like a midterm or a final. And we might spend a little bit less time or put a little bit less energy on studying for something like a quiz that doesn't really make up a large percentage of our grade. And what material do you need to learn in order to do well? And I'm going to talk about that quite a bit or often throughout our presentation today. Another helpful tip that goes along the same idea is that you need to learn how to manage your time. So you should try to identify how much time you have to prepare and also what you need to do in that time. You should start early. So if a test is in 2 weeks, you shouldn't be starting to prepare the day before. You should really be spreading out your studying over longer periods of time because our brains need that time to practice and to get used to the information and for those neuron connections to become stronger. Again, it doesn't happen overnight. And when we try to cram, it can be really destructive or make our learning harder and less effective. Some things that you can do to make sure that you are managing your time is to create a schedule or a to-do list so that, again, you know exactly what needs to be done before your deadline. But you do want to try to break those tasks or things that you need to accomplish up into smaller chunks. Again, if we try to do too much too quickly, we won't learn that material as effectively. So you should spread out your studying throughout the semester. Spread it throughout weeks, without months, and try to review that material as you go. Because this will help your brain to take it in better and to help you remember the information when it's time to take the test. Something you can do that is really helpful, and to help you do this, is to take advantage of any study sessions that might be happening throughout the year. The Center for Learning and Academic Success has several study groups for students, so you should check out our website to see if there's a study group that meets weekly for the classes that you're taking. The next tip that I have for you is making an action plan. So there's a couple ways that you can do this, and it's a very individualized process or something that would work specifically for you. What might work for someone else might not work for you. So if you're going to try to make a study plan, think about how you want to go about it. Do you want to use a calendar? Do you want to use an agenda book or a paper calendar? Are you more comfortable with checklists or your Outlook calendar? All of these can be effective ways to create an action plan like the one that you see on my screen. But as I mentioned earlier, you want to spread that studying over longer periods of time. You want to try to review material in manageable chunks. And you want to be aware of your personal limits. Everybody learns differently, so you want to take those into consideration and think about how and when you learn best. So an example of that is I am definitely a morning person. I find that I have a hard time learning or executing tasks after 9 p.m. I always joke that my brain turns off after 9. So if I have to prepare for a test and I have a few nights to do it, I might choose to work in the mornings. Or if I work full time, which I do, Saturday mornings might be a good time for me to start reviewing and getting the tasks that I need done. One of the most important things on this slide, and I think one thing that students and people in general often tend to forget, is that they also need to make sure that they're building in rest days. Your body and your brain needs rest in order to learn more efficiently. And if you don't build in intentional breaks, then we may run into a problem where our brain is overloaded, or maybe we're too tired to really take in and learn the information. So by building in rest days, you're giving yourself a chance to unwind and recharge so that you're ready to learn the information on the next day. So now I just have some helpful tips of things that you can do before the exam. And then I'm also going to touch upon what to do during and after the exam. Before an exam, it's helpful to do a few of the things that I have on this slide. First, it's a good idea to take a practice test if you have one. Sometimes your professor may give you this practice exam, and other times you may want to come up with some practice exams on your own. Either way is fine, but by doing some practice tests, you can start to test your knowledge and see what areas you feel most confident about, and also maybe some areas where you need a little bit of work or you need to spend a little bit more time on. On a similar note, you can review past exams. So if you've taken exams in the past and you've done really well, use that information to continue to brush up and practice. If you didn't do so well on that quiz or exam, then it's probably a good idea to take a look at those concepts that you missed. By doing that, you can go back and review and continue to strengthen those skills for next time. It's also often a good idea to build a relationship with your professor and to meet with them, especially before a large exam. By meeting with your professor, you can seek clarity or help understand what concepts are going to be on the test and what you may be tested on. It's also an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you're unsure, ask those questions to your professor, because it will help you to direct your learning or focus your learning as you go. You can also review topics that are confusing to you with a tutor. As we've mentioned in many of our CLAS acts, tutoring is a free service in the Center for Learning and Academic Success. And we encourage you to meet with those tutors in order to start talking and reviewing your information early. Some tips for studying smart. So once we've, kind of planned out our action plan, we've met with our professor, there's a couple things that you can do when you're getting into studying. The first thing is finding a space with limited distractions that works for you. Again, this is very individual. So some people might like to study in their residence hall or their apartment. Other students might be more comfortable studying in quiet places like the library. Or you may prefer studying in a place like a coffee shop. It's up to you as long as you feel like you can focus and do what you need to do and there's limited distraction. Something else that can help you with your studying is you can create a review sheet, or if your professor gives you a review sheet, you can spend some time looking at that. These can be particularly helpful for students because review sheets often have insights or information about what you're going to be tested on. So you make sure that you focus on the concepts that are outlined in these types of review sheets. Studying with friends and classmates can also be a way to make studying a little bit more fun. It also serves as another purpose where you can talk concepts or terms out with your peers. You can have a discussion or clarify certain things that you may not understand or your friend may not understand. And it makes learning a more collaborative process. So that might be something that you want to try. And my last tip on this slide about how to study effectively is to try out different strategies that will work for you. So for example, I'm going to talk about these 3 strategies that you can try on the next few slides. And that's making flashcards, if you like doing that, creating mind maps, if you're a visual learner, or having those discussions with your classmates like I just spoke about. So the first one up is talking about mind maps. So as I mentioned, mind maps are great for students that are visual learners. Basically, what a mind map is, and again, you can see an example of one on my screen, but it's a visual map of your ideas. So you take a subject or you take a concept that you're trying to learn or that you need to focus on, and you put that in the middle. From there, you think about subtopics or other connections that can be made to that original subject, and you branch them out and you write anything that you know at the moment, or you can also write things that you need to know. Again, this is great for visual learners because you can see everything on one page, and you can use this mind map to help make connections between ideas and to further direct your study. Another helpful thing that you can try is making flashcards. I am definitely somebody that likes making flashcards, and I have used Quizlet, which is a online app that you can either download to your phone or to your computer so that you can make flashcard decks at your convenience. So flashcards are really great for learning terms or concepts in a class, and also for studying vocabulary. Flashcards can help us test ourselves to make sure that we do understand information and that we know answers. And it also helps us to improve our memory, especially if we're looking at flashcards often. Because as I mentioned, the more that you repeat a task, the more that you test yourself, the more comfortable you're going to be with the concept, and the more likely you are to get the answer correct. To use flashcards, you would simply write the prompt, the term, or the idea on one side of the card. And then on the back of the card, you would write any information or definitions or processes, things that you need to learn. So again, something that I've mentioned in this presentation already, but I can't tell you how much this has helped me as I study for my classes and try to learn new material, and that's to discuss concepts with other people. So this can really be anyone. This can be classmates that are taking the class alongside you or with you. It can also be friends or family. But by talking out information with other people, we are able to really think about our understanding, articulate or explain our ideas, and also seek clarification. If we're not sure that we know a topic, we can have a discussion with somebody else. And by hearing somebody else's perspective or understanding, it can help us to improve our own understanding. So I would definitely encourage you to just spend some time. And again, this can be very informally, but finding a buddy, finding a classmate, finding a peer, and just discussing what happened in class. And sometimes that can be a helpful strategy for preparing. So something else that I want to touch upon, and something that I hear from a lot of students about, is they're not sure what to study. They're not sure how to start, and they don't know what information they're going to be tested on. So it's good to try to do your best to spend some time predicting what types of test questions you're going to see, so that you know exactly what you're going to spend time on and how you're going to prepare. So in order to do that, there's a few things that you can do. As I mentioned, you can talk to your instructor or your professor. And I would encourage you to visit them during their office hours or try to see them after class if that's something that they do. By seeking clarification and kind of asking your professor what is going to be on the exam, it can help offer that clarification. They may not always tell you. Sometimes the professor won't be as direct, but a lot of them will. And I think it's worth asking the question if you're unsure. You can also look for potential test questions in your own notes and assigned readings. So if you take notes, which I encourage everybody to do, highlight and mark things that are really important. Anytime the professor says, write this down, or if something seems like a very important concept in your reading, mark that, make note of that, so that you know to go back and return to that material when it comes time to study. You should also get in the habit of saving any and all tests, homework, labs, and quizzes, any past materials that you have that you would like to review. This can definitely be helpful in a lot of ways, but again, it can help direct your learning, and you can go back and spend more time on the places that maybe you didn't do so well. And you want to listen in class. That is another one that I can't stress enough. Listen in class. Sometimes professors will tell you a little bit about what's going to be important for you to know. And if they do, make note of that. Try to remember that, because that's going to be key information. And Grace, yes, I am recording this, so I will definitely go ahead and send this recording over to you. No problem. I'm glad you're here. So now I'm going to transition a little bit to what you can do during the actual exam. Okay, so what that looks like. One of the most important things is that you get rest and that you eat a balanced meal, before you go in and take your test. It may seem like a small thing. I've heard students say, well, I don't need to do that. I can function on a few hours of sleep at night. or I didn't have time this morning, so I didn't, take the time to have breakfast. Your body needs fuel and energy in order to learn and to have you perform at your best. And so if you aren't taking the time and you're not getting adequate rest or sleep, if you're not eating, that can be a very destructive or challenging part of your preparation. You also want to try to arrive early for the exam. When we're late, we get very stressed. And so if you're early, you have time to kind of relax, review, get in the right mind space. And that's all really important before you're taking a big exam. But one thing you want to try to avoid, and this is something that, I did a lot when I was in college, was I would get to the exam and I would break out my notes and I would try to cram in any last bit of information. And when I say cram, I mean try to fit all of this extra information in my brain at the very last minute. And I would encourage you not to do that, because research shows that trying to cram or fit in that extra information at the last minute is actually not good for us. And it doesn't help us to remember the information when it's time to remember it. Remembering all testing materials is something that also is really important. I'm obviously bringing a pen or a pencil or some type of writing utensil is key when you're taking an exam, because you need something to write with. But you should also remember things like a calculator. If this is a math test, I need to bring a calculator if those are allowed, or any other materials that you might need for the exam. And then once you've done all that, you want to stay calm. You want to think positive and remind yourself that you're prepared, that you've put in the time and energy, because that will help a lot. Being in that mindset can really help you perform well and help with things like test anxiety, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And now that you're prepared, a couple things that you can do once you begin. So on the same point, or on a similar note that I just talked about, you want to take a deep breath. Taking a deep breath actually does a lot for us. It does more than you think. It can help us stay calm. It can help slow down our breathing and our heart rate. It can help us focus and kind of helps curb some of that uncomfortable feeling or uneasy feeling that we might get as we're starting an exam. If you're allowed, the other thing that you can do is write down any information that you remember. And you can do that after you have the test in front of you. I would not do that before unless you are allowed to bring materials or notes into the test. But if you aren't allowed and you get the exam and you're afraid you're going to forget something, make a little note in the upper corner or wherever there's free space on the paper. And that way, if you do forget, you have a reference or you have a note to help you remember. You're also going to hear me say this quite a bit in this presentation, but you want to make sure that you're reading and you're rereading all directions. Reading once, especially if we're nervous, we might miss key information about what your professor is looking for. And that could cause us to get answers wrong, even though you know the information. So rereading, making sure you are understanding what is being asked of you is key. You can also start with the sections that you feel most confident about. So if you feel really good about your knowledge of a specific area or concept, start there. Get your confidence up a little bit. And then you can always go back and spend some time on the sections that you don't feel as secure or confident about. But you do want to make sure, if you're using that approach, you're watching your time. If there's a time limit on the exam, and you're spending too much time on one particular section, you may not have enough time to go back and complete all the questions. So just be aware of your time, know how much time it might take you to answer the questions, and go from there. So at this point of the CLAS Act, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the different types of test questions that you might see. And on this slide, there's a few examples of different types of test questions that a professor may or may not use. And usually a lot of this is discipline or subject specific. So for example, science majors or science classes, might use a lot of multiple choice tests in order to gauge understanding. Or they may use diagrams that you have to label. It really depends on the test and how your professor wants to assess or determine your learning. So we're going to go through a couple strategies for each of these areas. So the first one I'm going to talk about are multiple choice questions. And I think this is a common one in a lot of classes that students may see. A multiple choice question is a question where the student is asked to choose one or more answers from a list. Okay, so they're going to give you a list of potential answers, and it's your job to figure out which one is correct. So you're going to read the question carefully. Again, we want to make sure that we know what the professor is asking. Because if we don't know, or we didn't take the time to read the question in its entirety or at its length, we may miss key information that we need to answer it correctly. You should also, or could also, try to answer the question in your head yourself before looking at the answers that are given to you. And the reason that helps is it can certainly help with your confidence. If you're reading a question and you can come up with the answer before you even see if the answer is listed, then chances are you're answering that question correctly. And you're not using the choices as a fallback. If you're not sure, or you try answering the question in your head and you can't quite come up with the answer, or you come up with an answer, but it's not listed, then you should try to use something that we call process of elimination. And basically what process of elimination is it's a strategy where you try to eliminate or take away any answers that you don't think are correct or true. So if you're looking at the answers and they don't make sense to you and you're pretty confident that it's not correct, just cross that out, throw it away. And usually if you can get it down to one or two answers that could be correct, you raise your chances of getting it correct. You can always skip questions. So if you've done that, you've tried process of elimination and you still don't know, it's okay to skip that question and go back to it later. You just want to make sure that you have time because we want to make sure that we can get through the entire test. But definitely give yourself some time, move on to other questions and go back and try that question again. And you also just want to make sure that you're double checking your answer sheet. So an easy way to lose points is to move so quickly that we accidentally circle the wrong answer or we fill in the wrong bubble, even though we know what the answer is. So something that's helpful is to just go back when you're done, if you have a few minutes before you turn that test in, and just give it a check. And hopefully you won't throw away or lose any points for questions that you know. So the next type of question that you might see on your exams are true or false questions. So a true or false question generally asks the student to read a statement and to decide whether that statement is true or correct or false, incorrect. So you definitely want to read those details carefully because these questions can be tricky. Sometimes the way that they are designed or created can be in a way that's misleading to you. So by taking the time to read it carefully, we can look for words that are going to help us solve these types of problems. Something else I would consider you to do if you notice or encounter a multiple choice question on an exam is to approach or look at each question as if it were true. So what I mean by that is you want to look at each statement as if it were true, and then determine if there's any part or any fact of the question that is false or incorrect. If any part of the question is not correct or is false, then that's going to make the entire statement false. Some other things that you can look for in a true or false question is something called a qualifier. And a qualifier is a word like all, most, only, or rarely. So these types of words are important to pay attention to because they change or really impact what the question is asking. So for example, if you see words like all, most, only, or rarely, pay attention to those. It can help you answer the question correctly. An example that I have on my screen is that Suffolk University only has a law school. True or false? So you want to look at that question and treat it as if it were true. Is what it's saying an accurate or correct statement? No, it's not, because we have other schools at Suffolk. We have the business school, we have the College of Arts and Sciences. So that would automatically make that a false statement because of the word only. You can also watch for negative prefixes. So those are words like never, none, not, and cannot. An example of this, and what you could see on a test, is the capital of Massachusetts is not Hartford. So because we see that word not, that can kind of help us answer the question. The capital of Massachusetts is not Hartford, it is Boston. So immediately we know that that answer is true. Again, these can be tricky questions to answer, but looking for those key qualifiers and those key negative prefixes can help us to determine if it's incorrect or correct. The next type of question that I'm going to just spend a moment talking about are short answer questions. So short answer questions are open-ended, and they usually require that a student comes up with and writes in, their own answer. So they're commonly used in a lot of exams to help assess or try to identify how much the student knows and their level of understanding. There's several ways, that you could see a short answer on a test. So it could look like the example I have at the bottom of the screen, where it's a complete the following statement. So you'd need to read that statement and fill in the appropriate word or term. Or it could also look like the example that you see on the right. And that's to take a diagram and fill in the appropriate words or the words that correspond to each part. So that is also something that you can do. And some strategies for solving these types of questions are on my next slide. First, you want to study for understanding. Okay, so for these types of questions, because you need to have that deeper level of understanding, and you need to kind of be able to make connections across concepts, it's helpful if you can study for understanding and that you're not just trying to memorize the information. So you can do that by focusing on topics and concepts, looking big picture instead of just trying to memorize other details or just parts that are very, very specific. You can also use flashcards, and that will help you to continue to test yourself on terms and definitions to make sure that you do understand them and that you can relate topics to one another. You also can try to talk through concepts and information with a friend, because by trying to talk through things, you are basically articulating or describing your own understanding. And again, you can get your friend's perspective and see another way that somebody else thinks about the information. And that can help us to continue to develop or deepen our own understanding. But when in doubt, say you've done all of this and you still can't come up with the word or the concept, or you're not able to appropriately label the diagram, you should try to just make an educated guess. And what I mean by an educated guess is thinking about what you do know and giving your best attempt, trying your best to answer the question, even though you're unsure. Sometimes our educated guesses are correct. And sometimes if we don't know, that is a good strategy to try when you're answering short answer questions. So the next one I have is essay questions. Again, these are very typical, especially in English classes or writing classes. With every question that I've described today, you want to start by reading it carefully. The reason you want to start by reading it carefully is because you want to make sure that you understand what is being asked of you. If you read the question and you don't understand what is being asked, or you find the prompt or question to be confusing, seek clarification or ask your professor if they can clarify or explain it again. You can also try identifying keywords in the question. A lot of times, professors or teachers will use keywords or key concepts in their questions to communicate what they want you to do. So they might say things like summarize or explain or describe, list. Those types of words you want to pay attention to make sure that you're giving them what they've asked and that you're following the appropriate structure or format. If given choices, so sometimes professors will give you 3 or 4 or even 5 essay questions to choose from, I would encourage you to look through that list and to choose the one that you feel most confident about. You always can try one that you don't feel so confident about, but confidence is key. And if you think you can answer that question correctly and you have supporting details or information to give the professor what they want, then I would go with that question. And you can also make a brief outline if time permits or if time allows. So I wouldn't spend too much time on this outline because you want to make sure that you have time to write the essay or go back to questions that you may need to. but it's definitely okay to jot down or write down some notes or an outline so that you know what stance or what direction you're going to take. A couple tips. So when it comes to drafting or writing your essay, you could always begin, if you're not sure how to begin, by rephrasing the question as a statement. So I've included an example of what I mean by this on the screen. So if the question, and they're asking you to write an essay about this topic, is should public transportation in Boston be free? Explain and support your answer. So I would first look for those keywords. So they want me to explain and support. That should tell me that I need to explain my thoughts and my reasonings and give supporting details. I can also start my question or my answer by rephrasing the essay question as a statement. So you can see that this student chose to start their answer as public transportation in Boston should be free because the average American spends 25.9 minutes a day traveling to work one way. And then the student continues to add supporting details and further explain their reasonings. But by starting with that first sentence, public transportation in Boston should be free because it immediately or quickly tells the author or tells your professor what you're going to talk about. You want to make sure that your answer has clear points throughout. So you want to avoid talking broadly or not giving specific information if you can help it. The more clear your points are, the more your professor is going to see that you understand. So including things like relevant facts and figures are definitely good things to work into your essay. But as always, time is important. And essays can take a lot of time if you're not writing quickly or sure about what you're going to say. So you always just want to check back, look at the clock, make sure that you're not spending too much time on one particular point, because that could make it so that you don't finish. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is open book. And so sometimes students have questions about open book exams. And so I tried to come up with a couple tips and strategies for handling or approaching these exams. So basically, an open book exam is when your professor has given you permission to take a quiz or test or an exam with your notes, with your books, or potentially with other resources that they allow. In order to prepare yourself for this, you do want to make sure that you're organized and that you're bringing your textbooks and your notes to the class. Because if you're allowed to use them, you want to make sure that you have them. A mistake that I think a lot of students make is they try to write too much in their notes. Or I'll see students come in with a piece of paper with words that are this big, tiny, tiny words and concepts, because they're trying to fit everything on that piece of paper. That can be tricky, that can be challenging, because it may be overload or too much information for you to sift or sort through during a timed exam. So what I would encourage you to do is to be intentional about what materials you're bringing, to spend some time highlighting or putting Post-it notes or tabs in your notes or in your book to help direct you to concepts that you think may be covered. You can also try to write down some key formulas that you know you might be tested on or key concepts that you know that you might be tested on, and have those ready. We put too much information and we try to cram it all in, we may, again, put our brain into overload and have trouble finding what we need. So try to anticipate what questions may be asked. And that's exactly what I mean by predicting what material will be covered to avoid overloading your notes. Take some time to actually think about that and what it may look like. And then design your study materials and your notes based off of that. So now, after the exam, it's after the exam, you've finished, you should be proud of yourself, you probably feel very relieved. Your work isn't over. And I think a lot of students also sometimes finish an exam and they never think about that material again. It's in the past. You want to make sure that you're spending time thinking about and reflecting on your performance. So you can ask yourself questions like, how do I feel about how I did? How effective were my study strategies? Did I feel like they worked for me? Or do I think they could use some improvement? And lastly, what can I do now that I have this information to do better on the next exam or to prepare better? These can be really, really helpful. And I can't stress enough how much learning is trial and error, practicing different things, finding strategies that work for you. And you can use this information to tell you what's working and what's not working. And if something isn't working, that's okay. It's part of our learning process. But we would want to learn from that mistake or learn from that error and switch up or try something new. You also don't want to dwell on the questions that you've missed. It's easy to beat ourselves up when we know we've missed a question or when we get that test back and we didn't do as well as we hoped. It's a normal feeling, but let it go. Use this as a learning process. Take the information, and help yourself do better for the future, but don't dwell. Instead, you want to try to take time for yourself. You did a hard thing, so you want to try to unwind and relax and recharge for the next one. When the exam is returned, there's a couple things that you also can do to help you improve on the next exam. Again, you want to view that test as a way to gather feedback on your learning. And there's no right or wrong way to do that, but it does take time and energy. You also want to remember that a poor grade is not a reflection of your intelligence. It is also not a reflection of your self-worth. Just because you did bad or you did poorly doesn't mean you are bad. And there's lots of room in order to do better next time. So you want to use the feedback that you get from your professor. You want to take a look at their notes and their corrections and use that to move forward. So some things that you can consider is what material did the instructor use to base their test questions? Again, that can help you predict what they might do next time when they're drafting the next exam. You can consider what types of questions were asked. So if there were a lot of true and false questions and you find that that's something that's difficult for you, that's okay. Go ahead and spend more time next time on how to prepare and handle true or false questions. Again, look at those types of questions that you missed. And that's kind of the same idea of what I just mentioned. And again, I mentioned this already too, a little bit early, but you can learn from your professor's comments to help you prepare better for next time. So these next couple slides, we're almost getting to the end, but I think this is also one of the most important things that is in this presentation, and that's how to deal with test anxiety. Test anxiety is a combination of physical symptoms and emotional reactions that interfere with your ability to perform on a test. And this is something that's normal. I think every student that I've ever met, including myself, has run into test anxiety at some point during their college career. Okay, it's normal. Some of the physical things that can happen when somebody is struggling with test anxiety is they can actually start sweating. They can be shaking or have that rapid heartbeat that doesn't really feel so good. Like your heart is beating so fast that it's going to come right out of your chest. You can have other physical symptoms like, dry mouth, nausea, that unsettling feeling in our stomach, or even faint if you get to the point where it's extreme. Some emotional things. So emotional things that can happen is students can be depressed or have low self-esteem because of their performance on tests. They could be angry. I'm putting in the effort. Why am I not doing as well as I want to? They can have feelings of hopelessness, distress, and just feeling inadequate or not good enough. And so to try to avoid some of these feelings, because they aren't good for us to feel, I have a couple solutions or strategies to kind of help you work through test anxiety if this is something that you experience. So the causes and effects, I will run through these very, very briefly, but some factors that can lead to test anxiety. If you've had bad experiences, if you've had trauma, linked to testing, it can trigger testing anxiety. Because if you did poorly once, your brain may think that you're going to continue to be bad or you're going to continue to do poorly despite preparing or studying. You might just have a general feel of failure, comparing yourself to other students. You could end up having poor grades if test anxiety is getting in your way of performing a task or doing well. And it can also link to poor study habits because we're not in the right mindset in order to focus and spend time learning the information. So if that happens, how can this look during a test? Well, students with testing anxiety could go blank. They could forget the information even though they know that they studied it. They can have difficulty focusing throughout the exam, and that can prevent them from finishing or getting the right answers. They can do poorly or get a low grade, even though, again, they prepared and did everything correctly. And you may find that you're remembering the answers after you leave the test, which isn't helpful because you want to know them during the test. So how to manage? It's a couple things that I can recommend or encourage you to do to help alleviate or take away the symptoms of testing anxiety. First, you want to practice stress management strategies. Anxiety is often, causing a lot of stress for people. So doing things like deep breathing techniques, really slowing down and being intentional about our breathing before and even during tests is a good thing to start doing. Meditating, again, either before or during if you need to. Don't meditate too long because we want to make sure you have enough time to finish. But that can also be something that could help. And positive self-talk. Positivity is power. And the more positive we can be about a situation, the better it's likely to turn out. So trying to avoid negative self-talk, telling yourself that you can do this and that you're smart and that you got it can help us get in the right mindset. You will also want to try to prioritize self-care. Self-care is important. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we need to be intentional about the time that we're giving ourselves. We can't pull all-nighters and study all day and cram before a test and not eat before, or get enough sleep. If we do that, it's going to have a very negative aspect on their performance. So you do want to make sure that you're building that time in before you take a test. And the last couple, one is developing good study habits. So that's really figuring out what works for you. It's trying the different strategies and techniques that we talked about throughout this presentation. If something works, awesome. If it doesn't work, throw it away and try something new. We're constantly learning, and that's okay. And you want to try to minimize distractions. So minimizing distractions can also help you focus in and do your best work. And lastly, you want to try to learn to accept mistakes. Mistakes are part of the learning process. We're not learning anything unless we're making mistakes and we're learning from them. And our self-worth as students and as people is not connected to how well we do or the outcome of the test. So remember those things, and I know it's easier said than done, but if you can start encouraging that positive self-talk, I think you'll notice a difference in how you do. And so for my last slide, at least I think it's my last slide, I want to talk a little bit about the supports that are available to you, because you don't have to do this process alone. There's lots of people on campus. These services are included in your tuition and fees as a student, so take advantage of them. The first one is the Office of Disability Services. We often will call that ODS. Their office advocates on behalf of students with disabilities. So if you do have a documented disability, I would encourage you to reach out to their department and talk about whether you would qualify for things like testing accommodations, reduced distraction, a note taker, whatever that might be to help you learn best. The Center for Learning and Academic Success is another key resource for students that are learning how to study and preparing for exams. We have academic coaches, writing tutors, content tutors, English language tutors, study group leaders, and all of these people are here and want to support you. They want to help you figure out how you learn best and to talk about material, really tear that material apart and put it back together so that you feel confident. And you can book an appointment to see a tutor either by visiting us on the 9th floor of 73 Tremont. You can call our office and our phone number is listed on the website, or you can schedule through Navigate if you have Navigate access. If you do want to meet with an academic coach, though, you would want to email the director of coaching, and her contact information is online. And lastly, I also included counseling, health, and wellness, because they're an important department that can help you if you're experiencing signs or symptoms of testing anxiety. If it's getting in the way of you performing at your best, reach out and connect with somebody from their office. They offer counseling appointments if you think that that is something that's helpful to you. If not, they can also direct you to resources that you can use to help manage the issue. And again, these are all included within your tuition and fees, so you've already paid for them. You might as well try to use them. So at this point, does anybody have any questions? I will certainly make this recording available. Grace, I'm happy to send that to you if you would like it. But I'm happy to stay around.
I think I'm the only participant, just for information. So yeah,
that is okay.
But I'm going to ask you, like, can you send this recording to me, like, through what? Like,
sure, I can send it to your Suffolk email account if that's easy.
And another thing is that there's a CLAS previous talk. It's also via Zoom. It's about the technology that is used to help for academic success. Are you the person doing that one? Are you that?
So a different presenter presented that, but I do have the recording if you would like that recording as well.
Yeah, just 2 recordings. Yeah, I want to go through it and use it for my upcoming exam and quizzes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. So Grace, it may take probably a day or two for me to get this link back and to get the recording. But if you put your name in the chat and your email address, I can take it down and send this to you once I have it.
Yeah, just both of them for today, and I'm going to do it now. So
Definitely. Definitely. Thanks for logging in. All right. So if there aren't any other
why there's nobody? I don't understand why.
hold on one second, Grace. I can go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording so that you and I can talk. But hang on one second.